Hello and welcome back to another Reaconteur video, and in today's video I'll be going over why I think Deepwoken's legendary weapons don't feel legendary or rare anymore, or even special. Make sure to subscribe since only about 20% of the people watching right now are actually subscribed. And also I'm currently live on Twitch, so drop into my stream when you're done with this video. Now let's get into it. First of all, Deepwoken is one of the most consistent games on all of Roblox when it comes to consistency and updates. In fact, I think Deepwoken can be considered one of the most consistently updated games, period, when you compare the ratio of updates to content provided per update. I mean, when games like TF2 exist, it's not really that hard, but regardless, I feel like the quality of Deepwoken's updates have been pretty high. However, I do also feel like they have regressed for a lot of reasons within the last few months. First of all, when was the last time we actually got a memorable weekly update? The only two major weekly updates I can remember are the release of Iron Sing and when the Secret Maestro boss fights were added to the game. These updates were memorable because they both provided things that aren't highly specified that anyone can use or go for if they choose to, in comparison to adding a weapon, for example. When the Deepwoken developers add a weapon or a mantra, it really only appeals to people who like that weapon type or the attunement associated with the mantra. If they add a new light dagger weapon, then only light dagger users are going to be hyped for it, even if it's the best weapon in the game, unless you have all the Chime players metamancing to use it because it's the new best weapon in the game. This is important for a few reasons, which I'll get back to later. Regardless, updates to bosses, the map and enemies, armors and loot pools, new bosses and new attunements are all universally available and appreciated update types. Since none of these things are locked to a specific playstyle or attunement, it means everyone enjoys when things like a new boss come out. Back to my previous point, the Deepwoken devs have been adding a lot of legendary weapons, and I mean a lot of legendary weapons. We've gotten 4 legendary weapons in the last 4 weeks, that's 1 per update on average. And since the last major update, which was Layer 2, we've gotten a whole 12 new legendary weapons. Although some may have lost legendary status, like the Railblade, which was initially not enchantable, and due to my video became enchantable. Now, this may not sound like a lot of weapons, considering Layer 2 came out almost 2 years ago at this point, but currently they're adding almost a new legendary every weekly update, and then they'll be throwing in a random weapon with it sometimes that gets overshadowed by the new legendary. And I feel like at this point it's just become for the hype of keeping the player base alive by adding new legendary weapons, or at least weapons with legendary status. When we look back at Deepwoken, it was initially supposed to be a PvE based game with PvP elements that weren't necessary but could often not be avoided in situations where you're forced into combat, like when a player attacks you. Over time, this image has shifted into a game where you can entirely progress with PvP, and the devs seem to care more about the PvP and Chime of Conflict community than the PvE based community. This is also why I think so many of the new weapons are just getting outlandishly crazy, like the Isli's Pyre Keeper, which has 4 crits while being both a light and a heavy weapon with a massive greatsword and a fast dagger. To me, it feels like the developers are throwing out legendary after legendary right now, which I personally think is unnecessary when there's currently a huge drought in PvE content, with the only real PvE content being Hell Mode and the Diluvian mechanism, which are not only basically the same thing, but they also help to easily farm legendary weapons. The devs are currently focusing really hard on appealing to the PvP community, when the PvE community would be happy with a new monster variant like every month, but the last monster we got was the Broodlord, and before that it was with Layer 2. Regardless, Deepwoken's legendaries are becoming super common for more reasons than just the new farming methods like the Diluvian mechanism. Over time, there's been a lot of quality of life benefits which just make the game easier and add more legendary weapons into the game. A perfect example of this is the Reflections of Self Fountain, which lets you pass items down. On Deepwoken's release, legendaries could not be passed down, and you could pretty much only pass down accessories and enchants. But today, Deepwoken's legendaries can be passed down for echoes, and they get soul bounded by this. So if you have a 3-star damage Isli's Pyre Keeper, then you're probably going to have it forever because of how easy it is to hold on to it with updates like this. Because not only can you pass it down to your next slot after you've wiped with it, but it's also soul bounded to you on spawn, so you can't even drop it. But also, the rates of items in the game were raised significantly since the game first came out, making it super easy to get them in comparison to back then. Now, I know someone's going to try and say that I contradict myself by saying something like that, and people are going to say something like, oh, but Radiator, I thought you hated Deepwoken progression. Why do you want to be harder and grindier to get rare items and legendary weapons? And my reasoning for this is because you don't really need them. In the same way you don't need a full max HP armor kit, you don't exactly need a legendary weapon. For Chime meta you do, but that's different because that's only dictated by players and how easy getting legendaries is. Back when I first started playing and when Chime of Conflict first came out, did people use legendaries like the Curved Blade of Winds and Chime? They did if they could, but most people didn't because of how rare they were, and that's what made it special. Anyway, unlike leveling up, getting rare items that make you stronger should be hard to get. I don't like Deepwoken's progression very much because after the first time it becomes kind of a chore, right? But getting legendary weapons should be a chore. Your reward for completing a hard grind or quest should be a legendary weapon, rather than you getting 6 different legendary weapons in the Luvian mechanism while auto-clicking because you stat check every monster in the game. The level progression itself shouldn't really be that hard or that much of a chore because the game is permadeath, so nobody really wants to do it more than once. But other than that, it's all the same thing every time. Deepwoken's progression isn't really that fun, right? So I shouldn't have to go through it every time because it's the one thing that you absolutely need to do. Progressing and leveling up is a necessity in this game. Legendary weapons are not. They've become a necessity for the Chime of Conflict and PvP meta because of how common they were. Giving them some sort of like unique quests or making them more rare would make them more legendary, and then it would be a lot more fun and there would be a lot more build variety in the game rather than just one of 4 legendary weapons that you see every build using. In fact, even the announcement of new legendary weapons are kinda lame, especially when we look back at what legendary weapons are. Every legendary weapon in the game has some sort of significance to its lore and creation. The legendary weapons are all unique weapons, like the Grand Sudaruska for example. It's literally an axe with the soul of a demigod imbued into it that gives it ice powers. It is all the legendary weapons are one of one in the lore. The only reason why they exist multiple is because technically in the Deepwoken lore, there's only one player character, which is why player characters are so strong. So when we really look at Deepwoken, everyone is technically the same person, and there's only one of every legendary weapon in the game. And yet you can pick them all up off of a Sharko's chest in the depths if you're lucky enough. Deepwoken legendaries are only legendary in name. In old Deepwoken, they were at least also legendary in rarity, which made them feel special. But the fact that these weapons of legend, which were created and imbued with some sort of godly or magical powers, all have no real obtainment method is lame. The only weapons they ever did this for were the Maestro weapons, which all technically have a unique obtainment method. It is a little lame because it's basically the same boss fight for all 3, but at least it's unique. Calixtes in Inferno is the only weapon with a unique obtainment method that I really like. It adds the extra risk for the quest for obtainment because you need to go down to layer 2 without a light hook to get it. It has a secret obtainment requirement that would be hard to find out without guides, being the requirement of some sort of flame worshipper gear, and it has a unique boss at the end of the quest. This is one of the best quests in the game, but then they got lazier with it, with the Raveclaws quest being basically just an NPC hunt, and now they're trying to add quests to some of the legendaries because I'm sure that they also feel, and by they I mean the devs also feel, that legendary weapons aren't rare anymore, but they're kind of just lowering the quality on these quests like the Wraithclaws one. The only legendary weapon that ever felt cool to get was the Purple Cloud because it was the first Maestro's weapon of the 3, so it was unique at the time, and Plitsky's Inferno because the quest for it is actually amazing. Everything else about the other legendaries has been pretty lackluster, and then when it comes to balancing them, it's just not good. There's so many legendary weapons in the game at this point to where their use cases heavily overlap, meaning that for any type of build, there's probably a strictly best legendary weapon if there is any overlap. Heavy, Yisli's Pyrokeeper. Sure, Crypt Blade is Shadow, but the Pyrokeeper and Flame builds are strictly better than any build you can make with a Crypt Blade most of the time. And then with the new weapons releasing every week and getting nerfed a week later, new ones fall into the sidelines really fast. The Curve Blade of Winds is currently still considered better than most legendaries in the game, and it's been out since the game's release pretty much. And most of them aren't even viable at all. Flareblade Kamas are a great example of this. Sure, they can be fun if you want to win, though you can't really use them in Chime at high elo. They scale with arguably the worst stat in the game, Intelligence. They're a dagger type weapon which has better options in terms of stats, which include literally anything else because intelligence sucks, and their crit is situational and hard to use in certain situations. And the Kirasiger is basically the same thing in the same spot since it's a railgun, but for some reason it scales on charisma, because being charming makes your railgun do more damage because you shoot the massive purple laser of charm at people, right? Yeah, that makes sense. This one actually just felt like they wanted to make a legendary for every stat, which is kind of lame, but whatever. But these two legendaries are a great example of they can be fun to use and you can specialize a build around them, but they're not really that good, so most people don't use them, which contributes to the lack of build diversity in high elo Chime. And there's just so many legendaries with so little to do with them because the game is so oriented around Chime of Conflict. Reaconteur broke 2 things he said he would never do after Rogue Lineage. First of all was bring back Snap Gelidus, which for those of you who don't know, Snap Gelidus is basically just Ice Skate with Frozone, except it was in Rogue Lineage before. And the second thing he said he would never do is add private servers. And Chime of Conflict is just a 1v1 private server. Nobody runs out of skulls because of the whole like honor system where you ask someone to log, they'll just log and they'll give you your skull back. Nobody's punished for losing because you get 3 chances and everyone just logs on to give you your skulls back. In fact, Ice Skate, which I think is the most problematic move in the game for just being poorly designed as a whole, isn't even remotely a problem because Chime of Conflict dominates Deepwoken, so it's useless in there. And because Chime of Conflict dominates Deepwoken, the meta consists of the top 3 consistent legendaries and then a new one rotating in and out every week or 2. Legendary weapons aren't rare anymore and everyone has them. Back in my day, don't call me Unk for that, the meta was the Forgotten Gladius or the Champion Short Sword, or maybe even the Shattered Katana back when it first came out. Regular weapons with legendaries being good but rare, so they weren't used by literally everyone, but anyone that had them would use them because they were good. But now any random freshie could be selling them to the antiquarian for notes to buy boulders with. Legendaries are worthless now. Hope you all enjoyed. Shoutouts to Jake, Kennick, Cyberboy21, and Drizzy Drake fan. Come check out the Twitch stream if you're still watching at this point. I love you all, and goodbye.